Today we meet in Tantanya, Adelaide, on the traditional lands of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains, and we extend our respects to Kaurna elders past and present. We recognise this country's rich traditions of knowledge and storytelling and pay respects to all Kaurna storytellers and all Aboriginal and First Nations storytellers. Amy And is a podcast that explores all kinds of bookish things, and that can include some pretty adult content. So please be aware that some of this content will be not safe for work or for young ears, and be careful who's listening when you are. Welcome back to Amy And. I'm here today with two of our regulars, Payton and Justina, and we have our extra special co-host today, who I'm going to introduce. So it's Georgia Nicholls, who is, I don't even know how to begin to describe you, Georgia. I would say someone who is an expert on not just rom-coms, but on representations of sex in rom-coms and on feminist interpretations of representations of sex in rom-coms. She's also a really talented writer who has written a romantic comedy, which is, I've read it more than once and it's excellent. And she has just finished her PhD thesis, so is soon to be Dr. Nicholls.
A couple more edits to do.
But done. By the time you see this episode, she will be done and dusted. So welcome, Georgia. Thank you. And so this is Smut Month on Amy And.
Yeah.
So
we're
looking
forward to.
This is like everyone's been building up for Smut Month.
Yeah, we've been teasing it.
Hopefully we reach climax and it's not a fizzer. But yeah, we kind of have a bunch of questions that we thought Georgia was the perfect person to have here because she can actually bring an informed opinion instead of our just rabbiting on.
Yeah.
So the first question I had, and thinking specifically about rom-coms and contemporary representation, so thinking about representations of sex in our current context, in the world that we live in, so not in fantasy worlds or in the past, like in the Regency, we're thinking about right now, right here. What do we think smut is?
I don't define it in my thesis, and I don't think I could. Like, I just think it's like a preference of what word to use as opposed to like it actually having.
So you don't think it's different to like sex? Like, so if we have romance, what are the terms people use for like spice rating or hot?
Yeah, spice,
erotica,
steamy.
I've been thinking
definitely not erotica.
Yeah,
I would say it's not erotica.
I was thinking about that on the way here because I feel like in erotica, a lot of the character and relationship development happens through the sex, whereas in books that contain smut and sexual content, it's more like
now here's 5 pages of sex.
Yeah, it's like something else is propelling the development, and then the sex happens along the way.
Yeah.
And do you reckon it's also just thrown in for extra? Like
Maybe
now you're going to have 20 pages of sex and it doesn't necessarily do that much plot work. It's just like, here's some sex.
Yeah, and it probably varies. Like in some books, it probably is kind of fundamental. Like in The Kiss Quotient, I remember that one, sex is pretty fundamental to that story and to that character's development.
Because I would say rom-coms, if we're thinking about rom-coms, I don't think the sex is ever divorced from the plot, right?
Yeah, it always serves a purpose. I mean, I write in my thesis about sex often showing the difference between them before they're in love and after they're in love. It's often used as a tool to communicate that.
So how's it different before they're in love versus after?
So sometimes it's really just down to the word level and how they're describing it.
Have you noticed, I've been binge reading heaps of romance lately, and sometimes it feels like the first time they have sex without a condom is like a stand-in for losing their virginity.
Wow.
It's like, yeah. It's really weird.
I've noticed that as well, and it's something I find so odd because they'll be like, oh, no, I'm on the pill. And I was like, that's not the only reason.
No, that happens a lot. There's a lot particularly written this century. Like as we've kind of gone further and further into the 21st century, that seems to be a stronger trope.
Yeah.
The idea that, it's okay. There was one we read, was it Ali Hazelwood?
Yeah.
Where it was like, oh, don't worry, I'm clean. And it's like, well, that's a weird description of it as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Also,
like-
the stigma that you're perpetuating by saying clean
Yeah.
is a bit.
They always have the conversation, I think, is the difference between like books post Me Too and after, like pre Me Too, is that they always feel like they have to have the conversation, but the end result is that they always want them to have sex without a condom, I think, because I think
Yeah.
there's like this theory that maybe it's more intimate or something like that. Because
That's interesting too, because you've done a lot of work on penetration and the way penetration stands in for like full sex, right? And
Yeah,
how,
it's like-
so then the condom, like the fact doing it without a condom is the next level of that we're kind of putting the focus on penetration.
Yeah, it's the yeah. If you want me to describe what I say, in
Yes,
the
please.
thesis, it's that, and this is from Becoming Cliterate. It's Lauren Mintz. Or Lauren Mintz. I actually can't be sure. She says at first that the words sex and intercourse are used sort of interchangeably, like they're the same thing, but they're not. Intercourse is like the act of penetration and penetrative sex act, and then sex is anything that sort of involves shared mutual pleasure.
Yeah.
And so
Because penetration like is often a very cishet kind of act anyway, right?
yeah, it's like the sex is often defined and by the penetrative acts. Like a lot in books, they say we haven't had sex yet, or we're going to have sex, and whenever they say the word sex, it always means intercourse or penetration of some sort. So yeah, it usually is the defining act of sex in any romance novel, not going down on someone, which seems pretty intimate to me, or like anything else. It's always the fact that the most reliable male mode of pleasure, which is usually penetration, is
Sex.
the most defining act of sex.
And that's always weird when you're reading a novel and it's like, we've done all this, we haven't had sex yet. I'm like, well, what have I just read?
Yeah.
What was all of that?
Yeah, Elle Kennedy does that a lot. She like referred like Hannah and Garrett in The Deal, or Grace and Logan in The Chase. I think it's The Chase or The Score. They're all very similar. They've like gone down on each other. They've like had all these really intimate moments, but they haven't had penetrative sex, and therefore they haven't had sex, which is a bit crazy.
Yeah. I just don't understand it.
But it just is coming down again to male modes of sexual pleasure always being privileged, and like the patriarchal perspective of sex always sort of centering around how men experience and sex and the purpose of sex.
That's so
being men.
interesting in a genre that's so, I would say, like known for centering female pleasure and for being a genre that's often written by women for women, that's around the fantasies that women have around love and sex.
Well, yeah, it's like a
Is-
comparative penetrative fantasy.
Yeah, is it the fantasy then that, oh, actually I might come if we
Yeah,
have
the
penetrative sex?
penetration. Yeah,
It might actually be enjoyable.
yeah. I use Roach's reparative fantasy, and I apply it specifically to penetration and also maybe wetness. I don't know, one of the others. And I talk about how it's like this reparative fantasy where suddenly penetrative sex becomes a pleasurable act for women, even though I think it's like 4% of women actually find it the most reliable mode of orgasm. And then like a third of women can orgasm from it. Like it's...
So this is interesting to me because it's such a huge thing at the moment, right? Like smut is really big in romance at the moment, and even in book marketing and fan cultures, and you know, there's so many pins and groups and ways of talking about smut, but about where we learn our sexual scripts from is so interesting. Like if we've learned things from porn, it's going to come out in the fantasies we're having.
Yeah.
And so how much, when you talk about, so Catherine Roach, you've quoted her a couple of times talking about the reparative fantasy, the idea that romance is trying to heal something or repair something. I find that really interesting to think, what is it trying to repair when we have these sexual scripts? Like, is it just replicating the things that we've learned about porn?
Something that I've found interesting lately is the way that idea of the reparative fantasy then convinces people to be really conservative and say, therefore romance is bad and you shouldn't have it. Whereas my response would be, well, no piece of media should be your sole source of learning about sex. So like anything you're internalizing in those books could be combated by an actual proper education about sex and consent. Because people are going to be watching porn anyway. do you
It's
ban
different from
porn or
porn
do
too,
you?
don't you think?
Yes.
Because like I think about when Game of Thrones was around and the sex position in Game of Thrones, there's a very different thing to reading a book. And you talk about this in your thesis a bit, Georgia, about subjectification. There's a very different thing to inhabiting the subject position of the body.
And having a full narrative.
Yeah.
And narrative context for it. I mean, I think sex education is one thing, but there's always education coming from another point. Like, I do think that they really do serve as a lot. And, like, sex in every romance novel is not the same because you're developing narrative contexts that are different. And even if you look at sort of a series like what Christina Lauren did with Beautiful Sex, and all of those books is very different for each couple, right? And so each one serves as this, like, educative purpose that you keep going through and you see a varied representation of what sex can look like. And look, it's all very, like, penetrative and still there's, like, a very patriarchal idea of how sex works in it, but I do think that they serve, like, a very helpful purpose to educate people. And I think it's different to porn that, like, pretty much zeroes in on the exact moment of sex. It's very focused on penetration again. It's very, so I do think that I think that saying that you shouldn't find your sexual education from them is maybe a bit
naive.
Yeah, because they're gonna get it. It's like saying someone's not gonna watch porn.
I grew up, I'm a lot older than you guys, but I grew up reading a lot of romance novels, and some of the things I learned were, I'm allowed to have fun here, and I'm allowed to enjoy sex, and I'm allowed to enjoy my body, and I'm allowed to be emotionally vulnerable. It's also okay, like, to try things out and not like them. But I think the fact they locate you in the woman's body, or, like, you know, if you're looking at male romance or female romance or any combination, they locate you in the body of the person engaged in the act. Whereas pornography, I feel like you're watching a body be acted upon.
Voyeuristic. Yeah. Like you're, perceiving something happening. And it's very, like, depersonalized as well. Especially there's, like, certain, like, POV videos that are just, like, ridiculous.
I do wonder, this is a question for everyone. I find this interesting. Do you feel like growing up in a culture where we see sex acted upon, like the penis acting upon a woman's body, or pornography acting upon, even girl-on-girl pornography is like an act upon a body, do you feel there's a dissociative element to that? Because I feel like romance is about the opposite. It's about not being dissociative. It's about connection and dropping into your body and experiencing
That's one thing that I like about sex in romance novels more so than in, like, pornography, is when the characterfulness of it, of that it's not just two bodies having sex. It's these characters who you've watched get to know each other and fall in love, and you know there's emotion in the scene, and there's, you know, a connection there that is physical and is also, you know.
Yeah. And your imagination as a reader is a much bigger part of the story. I feel like you contribute so much more actively than when you're just watching something, and when you're just watching the sex act, like Georgia said, nothing else.
There's, like, a level of where reading a romance, like, invites you as a reader to, like, fantasize upon the characters.
Yeah.
So that even when sex scenes are written in whichever way, like, an element of it is the reader thinking about things that they might find erotic or sexy that become a part of that scene.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Which is why it can be so weird when you read a sex scene that's so not up your alley, and you're like, oh.
Yeah. So, you know, one of the criticisms romance often gets is that it's unrealistic, right? Which I find ridiculous.
Probably just because it's, like,
Aspiration.
Considerate of female pleasure, and that doesn't happen very often.
I do think it's radical. Like, it's a radical act. So you've all been writing, or you've written, like Payton in Honours, you wrote some kind of romance in your book, and Justina, you're currently writing, and Georgia, you've written romance. So when you approach it, how do you approach writing it? Like, what do you think?
The actual sex?
Yeah. Like, is it aspirational? Is it confronting to go? Because I write it as well, and it's very confronting to write sex.
It's really hard to write sex scenes.
I feel like when I first draft something, I don't think about the audience at all, but then I overthink immediately afterwards, and, like, I don't know if any of that was, maybe all of that was really weird and I should just change it. Maybe I should make that much more conventional. I don't know.
I think I've only ever really written a fade to black. So I think what interests me is the characters and the relationship and the idea of like vulnerability between the two characters, or more. I've not written that myself.
Do you not think that there's something so vulnerable about having sex with someone though?
Yeah,
and that would like be that where that key
yeah.
vulnerability
So
is,
I write the like a lot of, I guess you might describe it as like foreplay maybe. I don't know. And where
I have a lot to say
yeah,
about
I know,
foreplay.
I know you do. I mean, I'll write up to a certain point, I guess, and then I get self-conscious as a writer, and I'm like, and
it's difficult.
scene.
Well, it's like hard. It's hard just to type the word like clit. That's hard to type.
Don't you
Like,
find
I
it hard
can't
to
do that,
find
I can't
words
do
for
that.
body parts too?
Yeah,
Like
and I
it
don't
is-
want to be too elusive. Like, and be
Yeah.
like, ooh, her center.
Her centre, her aching centre comes
Like,
up a
and
lot.
I
in
do
romance.
think there's like a lot of purpose to writing clitoris.
Is it your centre? Is it?
Yeah, it's not at the center, is it? It's not at the center.
It's not like he's playing with a belly button.
It's yeah, it's. I think that there's also a lot of purpose to saying clitoris, to know what a clitoris is.
yeah.
Like, and I don't know. To speak to what you were saying, Catherine Angel writes, "You're like unclothed and indurable. Indurable? I don't know how to really pronounce
Yeah,
that.
you say it
Yeah,
right.
indurable. When you're having sex, like it's this very intimate thing. Like
You
you're
are
very like
so
you're so
so
vulnerable and so
exposed.
exposed. So
Yeah,
like
even
to
just
think that
nudity. Is
yeah.
wonderful.
So writing that's difficult, and you have to consider all those things. It's writing sex scenes, and I say that in my thesis. It's like the most difficult thing I did, even just like thinking about the mechanics of it all, and then
And
coming up
especially there's like this pressure. I know there's a lot of feminists writing about this, but the pressure to be perfect, right? The pressure to write a sex scene and to be like, oh, well, it's politically perfect, right? It's not
Which
going
is
to
just
violate.
impossible. No
Yes.
one example of anything is going to be good in isolation.
That's right.
Everything is inherently
And the idea that you have to sanitize desire
yeah.
in some way, because you are going to reveal some scripts you've got that you've inherited. You just
Yeah.
are. And that you're going to find some things to turn on that maybe you'd be like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Don't
That's
know how
one
I
of
feel
the
about that.
issues that I have with people's response to the idea of reparative fantasies. People become very judgmental about it and say, well, it's doing that and that's bad because that's perpetuating those scripts about sex and whatnot. It's like you just literally don't have to be judgmental. You can just say that this is reparative fantasy and investigate it. It's okay. You don't have to judge people for enjoying it or writing it or reading it. Like, if you're just open-minded and curious, then you'll learn a lot more than by being so judgmental.
Yeah.
I don't understand
Amen.
it.
Sing it, sister.
Yeah.
And I think something around the idea of having these scripts, as you say, is that a romance novel is a character, not. I mean, while the author's own scripts from what they've learned might make its way into the book, and probably does without even thinking. You have to think about the characters themselves aren't going to be completely perfect in the way they think about and approach sex. Like they're going to have their own hang-ups, and part of that is what makes romance novels interesting is like picking apart those views and hang-ups.
Yeah.
I think it's very clear a lot of the time when you read essentially a lot of one author's work, you can see a lot of their biases come through.
Oh, you see the same patterns.
Yeah, you see the same
over and over.
patterns, the same sort of
I can go back to all my books and see the same patterns.
yeah, like Ali Hazelwood always has a man with a really big penis and a very small main female character.
I have a question that Payton actually wrote
yeah.
in here. Or was it, who was it? Was it you, Justina?
yeah.
It was you.
Justina.
It was Justina. Why are romance heroes so big with a capital B and heroines so small?
All I can think about is that video of someone talking about Taylor Swift dating the football player.
Yeah.
And like, now she gets to be small. Like, what the fuck?
It's just like a
So
reinscription.
does he, because she's pretty tall. He gets to be small now too.
It's just like a reinscription of gender roles, but in a sexual context. Like, he's big and I mean, I write it better in the thesis, I think. But like, she's big, he's small, and then that's reinforcing the fact that he's dominant, because big, I suppose you associate with dominance, and then small, she's submissive, which I suppose you associate with it, right? And so you're just like reinscribing these things, right? And a lot of the time when you read a scene where a guy has really big penis and she's quite small and tight and hasn't had sex in like 2 years or something,
And it's a bit painful.
it's like painful, and like he's controlling the situation but being considerate at the same time, obviously. And like it's all like you definitely see that's where the gender reinscription really comes in, and the gender roles are very obvious. guess. It's hard to sort of like even say that big equals masculine and strong and dominant, and then small equals feminine and small and submissive.
I'm going to do a
But,
call
like,
out to a friend. We were at a birthday party before Christmas, and she's just discovered Dragon Smut and Fantasy Smut and is like obsessed. And she was just like, I just want a guy with a big wingspan. And then she's like, I mean dick. I was like, yeah, I got what you meant. But it is interesting that is, I mean, it's partly it sells and people, because people want it.
Because the joke in A Court of Thorns and Roses is that wingspan correlates to dick size.
Yeah.
Like feet.
Like,
course.
Well, that's the and that's
And
just what she's done.
So strange. Why are we like this?
Yeah, but Ali Hazelwood will never not have a moment where the character goes, "Oh my god, your penis is so massive. That's not going to fit inside me." There's always that. Miguel Kennedy has a lot of like very.
But then that's also doing something, because, you know, there's a lot at the moment around people getting vaginoplasty, is that it? And labiaplasty and
labiaplasty.
various
husband stitch.
Yeah,
stuff.
all that stuff. And around that, like, those scripts are also maybe leading women to think there's something defective about them. If they're not so tight, it almost hurts.
But also that their like pleasure and like sexual appeal comes from physicality.
Yeah.
Like that they're gonna have better sex because they have less labia, like, which is a bit stupid because that actually reduces pleasure. But like, yeah, that they're it's not even sexual pleasure. I don't think sexual pleasure even comes into it. It's like their sexual viability and attractability and fuckability comes from their physicality.
I think fuckability is a good
Yeah.
term there, because I think that gets us back to the object, like being the object rather than the subject. Like it's about you being fuckable rather than you enjoying sex.
Yeah, and like a woman choosing to then do that to themselves makes her this sort of like, it's this form of self-subjectification is what you would think.
Yeah, so to get back, because you flagged something earlier when we were talking about foreplay, and I want to come back to that, because they're like the way romance sets up foreplay as kind of a huge part of the process of sex, I think is really interesting, and that pleasure coming out of foreplay. Like often there's a lot of novels now where often the big moment is when he goes down on her.
Well, I think the thing about foreplay is that we call it foreplay anyway.
Yeah.
The idea is that it's before penetration. So you call it foreplay. You don't call like Lauren Mintz, can't remember her name. She goes, well, you don't call like intercourse after play, after you've like gone down on someone. Like it's not like
Even the word play, right?
Yeah.
Is that you're playing around till you get
like
to the
it's
serious
decided
stuff.
that it's like separated, that it separates the sexual encounter, whereas in reality, and also this idea that a lot of the acts that occur during foreplay are like usually pertain to a woman's pleasure, so it's like clitoral
They don't
stimulation in some
often
way.
involve the penis doing an action.
No,
It might receive things, but it's not acting.
yeah, it's never. It's usually very female focused acts, and that's before you do that. Before you get it over and done with, it's like the motions of sex, and then you get to the thing where it's penetration, and that happens. So I think separating things and saying it's foreplay and then sex is reductive.
What do you think about? I think I heard a sexologist talk about. It was the first time I learnt the word outer course, and then how that's
Was
different
that
from
Emily
intercourse.
Nagoski?
This was someone else, but I think that's who she was referring to.
Yeah.
So I really need to read that book.
I'll
But
lend
then-
it to you. I've got it.
Yeah, thank you. Then she was talking about how she would consider foreplay to be all of the like circumstantial stuff that
Flirting.
happens before. Yeah, like tension.
Yeah, if
and-
foreplay's anything, it's like flirting and
Yeah.
like knee touches. It's like these not, and then I don't know. I don't like the idea of separating it. I like the idea of sex is anything that involves like shared mutual pleasure. It's the whole experience, and it doesn't, it doesn't have foreplay and then penetration and then it's over, and it doesn't end with male orgasm from penetration and things like that. Like separate, like I mean,
Like,
I think
how
a lot of
useful
women
does
Can
can
you have
separate
sex
it?
on your own then? Do you need a partner?
shared mutual pleasure.
Shared, so it has to be shared.
Yeah, shared mutual. Yeah, all those things. Like it's that sex. Yeah,
That makes
Because
sense.
then what happens? I'm going so random here. When people get these AI sex dolls, are they having sex or are they just?
No,
then you have to
they're
think
not.
about what a person.
I
is.
think.
Yeah.
I think that would
That's
still
when
just
you
be
have the right
masturbation,
amount.
wouldn't it? If it's a doll, you're not sharing pleasure with anyone.
Yeah,
It's just
Yeah.
actually an object.
I'm just interested because then reading a romance novel is a sexual experience, but you're doing it alone.
Yeah. Are you sharing pleasure with characters?
Yeah. As an author, please, I don't want you sharing. But
No.
I don't want to be sharing with you.
There's also, I think it does get really complicated when you, I feel like anytime we try to define a term, as soon as you can start picking apart every single word of your definition and then realize, how are we defining something like shared? How are we defining something like pleasure? Because in the space of like queer romance and like queer female romance, there are like elements of, it's so hard to use terminology without second guessing yourself. The idea of someone receiving pleasure or giving pleasure, there are some people who only do one, and that's a preference. And it's like, is that still a shared pleasure? But it might not necessarily be shared orgasms, for example.
Yes.
Yeah, it's like not a, maybe there's not like a physical gratification of it. I don't know.
But
And whether the orgasm has to be the pinnacle of sexual
Yeah,
pleasure,
exactly,
right?
yeah.
And also like male orgasm is often very prioritized, right? A lot of the time we see the end of the sexual script being when a man orgasms, usually from penetration. I think probably a lot of straight women who have had sex with men sort of come to this conclusion that sex finishes when the man orgasms from penetration. And it's like we have this very, even if you don't sort of realize it, sex in romance novels, when you start looking at it, every sexual encounter tends to end in his orgasm because he's made a orgasm 3 or 4 times before he's come or something or whatever, or it's like this like mutual like same like spontaneous like simultaneous orgasms, right? And you don't often see that script challenged. I only found one book where that happened, which was Love Theoretically by Ali Hazel. It's the only book where he came and then she came afterwards, and that's when sex ended.
Yeah. I know this is a random tidbit. I know this wouldn't necessarily be common, but I know that there are people with penises who don't orgasm during sex.
Yeah.
They still do it and they still enjoy it, but they don't necessarily always orgasm.
And it's a myth that men always do as well.
Yeah.
And it's a myth that men can't fake it. And there's a lot of myths around the penis and sex.
So then that comes to like sexual response and how we associate like ejaculation with this idea of sexual orgasm.
Yeah.
Like that is somehow.
And there's a myth about men and rape, right? Like because men can be sexually assaulted to that point of ejaculation without enjoying it.
Sometimes it's just a physiological response.
Yeah.
Like wetness.
yeah, I remember hearing you talk about that in a conference paper, about the idea that wetness is sometimes seen as a shorthand for consent.
Like an arousal. Like that's like subjective arousal because your body has like a physiological response. When in reality sometimes it's just, I mean, there are some theories that wetness is this sort of
It's a
physical
protective,
protective measure for rape and
That would make sense.
things like that. So it's only like 10% of the time does subjective arousal and your like physiological response actually overlap for women, supposedly.
10%.
And it's 50% for men, which is still not that
It's not that high,
statistically
is it?
significant.
Yeah.
But it is a lot more. And then because it's sort of more accurate for men, then we assume it's sort of the same for women. But.
So to get back to romance, I guess what we're circling is that nothing is perfect, right? It's doing a whole bunch of stuff that we can look at.
Fantasy's a big part of it.
Yeah, but one thing that is interesting is that it humanizes both characters, right? So if you're talking about a heterosexual couple, it also humanizes the male love interest, even if they're a vampire or a demon or whatever the hell they are.
Especially if there's like from his perspective as well. When they add in different POVs.
And they allow invulnerability
Yeah.
to a man who's having sex as well. So can you guys think off the top of your head any books you'd recommend with sex scenes you think are done well or that worked for you?
I loved Elsie Silver. Her
You've just
books.
gone on a binge of Elsie Silver.
Yes. Wild. I read so many of them back to back. I loved the most recent series. It's Wild Love and Wild Eyes. Those are really good. And I always forget the names of the different series, but I think Chestnut Springs is the other one that I really loved that series as well. This doesn't happen with all of her heroes, but she does vulnerability really well when she does it kind of thing. Their vulnerability when that's, especially in the latest series, I found that the men in Wild Love and Wild Eyes are very vulnerable. It's often like he falls first, he's like obsessed with her, that kind of thing, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love he falls first. And he waits. When he waits,
Yeah.
that's cool too.
I should have thought about this question beforehand.
But that is becoming your traadmark, so
Yeah,
it's okay.
a long pause, me staring at the ceiling,
Thoughtfulness.
staring at
Game
the
show
beautiful
music.
ceiling.
It's only because she
Um,
thinks so deeply.
Oh, yeah. I'm just going to give the first answer that's come to my head, which these books definitely have their flaws, but I do find the way that sex is written in them interesting. Is a couple years ago I went on a real Alexis Holt binge, and there's a book. I can't remember which book in the series it was, but he has a series that's, I think, How to Bang a Billionaire or something.
Amazing.
And it's definitely very, maybe it almost errs more on erotica side because it's very BDSM, kinkful.
So what there will we put the line between erotica and romance?
Erotica, I think, is like sort of has the purposes of like sexual
Getting
I
titillation.
think, well,
Yeah.
this is why I found the sex interesting. I think because it's so much about this character exploring this side of himself. And weirdly, I think some of the best sex in the book series is not with the main love interest. There's a point where they break up and our protagonist explores this like kinky BDSM side of himself with another partner. They're not romantically like linked, but they're just sort of good friends who have sex together. And I just found that
romance people would hate, like not like the idea of sex occurring in the book with anyone but.
Depends though. Maybe
Some people wouldn't like it, I think.
like there's so many polyamorous and harem books now
Yeah.
that maybe there is a readership.
Harem books are always reverse harem, and it's always a bunch of men owning one woman.
Yeah.
Or like having a relationship with one woman. It's never the other way around.
How about you? Which
I can't say good or bad anymore. I don't. I
Is
can't
there-
really do
okay.
it anymore.
I know there are authors that you love though. So there's a rom-com author who you must love their representations of relationships and sex.
I mean, I'm like the obvious answer is like Emily Henry. Like, yeah, it's good, but she's not that explicit.
She's
I
not
would
that
say.
explicit,
So it's
no.
not. Sometimes I'm a bit like, well, the omission of those things make it hard to be objective about how she's writing sex, right? But I think Ali Hazelwood, with everything that she does, every time she writes a new book, she's like challenging it a little bit more every time. So like, Not in Love, the main female character doesn't. She like starts out not wanting penetrative sex, and they go through this sort of thing of, will we get to that? Will we do it? And how can we make it this pleasurable experience for you? Even if it's not an orgasm kind of pleasure, it's just some kind of pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
So I really enjoyed that, and I literally read it after writing the penetrative section of my thesis, which was so frustrating. And then I also like that in love theoretically the sex didn't end when he orgasmed, like, and a lot of the time that is what happens. So I like that, and maybe it's her scientific brain. I don't know that she's like a part
I
of
do
these
feel like
things,
there's like her characters are different book to book. You don't always feel like I know that she loves Adam Driver, but I don't feel like you get
emotional-
replications.
yeah,
Like
exactly.
some people, it's like, oh, okay, this is the sex scene, and he'll do this now, and she'll do this now.
And she has her like tells her big penises and whatnot, but like it's I think that the sex is really, like maybe I didn't love the love hypothesis and things like that. But the recent ones, I haven't read Deep End yet, but I'm expecting something different. So I like that about her. I like that she's challenging it a bit.
Cool.
And that's new.
How about you, Amy?
I was just trying to think because I don't know. I read so many. I mean, I'm not huge on explicit sex anymore. Probably when I was younger. Now I feel like I've read it all.
Yeah.
But, you know, like I've got a friend who talks about, you know, tab A going to slot B. There's only so many times you can read about tab A going to slot B. I really am into character, and so anytime it's about a relationship and character. So that's why I think I'm more into romance than erotica.
Yeah.
But writing it is a real challenge. I
Yeah.
think writing it is, and particularly when you've written it many times, how you don't repeat yourself, and it becomes very clear what your favorite things are, what you like, how, So I think that's something we could talk about a little bit more, is how we write those things.
Do we have time to talk about bad examples?
We do not.
Rip.
I wouldn't give any anyway. I don't believe in it. I don't believe in it.
I will
think
just say the Bad Sex Awards every year, it's always a literary book that wins, not a romance, because romance authors can write about sex.
Yeah, and I just think assuming that sex is bad and funny and something to laugh about in a romance is maybe falling into tropes about romance
Yeah.
Oh,
again.
no, get over yourselves,
Like,
people.
oh, it's so funny. They wrote
Yeah.
bad sex.
The
People,
word
like,
smut
fuck
is interesting
around,
because
like-
people either love it or hate it, right? Like I've had people ask me not to use it in professional context.
Interesting.
Yeah. So some bookstores are very adverse to putting stickers
The
up
word
saying
smut?
smut.
The
Like the
etymology
word-
of it is that it originally meant to mark something, make it dirty with like soot.
Mm.
Yeah, and then
It's
that
a
became
dirty book.
Yeah.
Well, I
I
guess
don't,
that's
can I
probably-
say the word? Can I see you next Tuesday?
Yeah. Say whatever you like. We'll bleep it out if it doesn't work.
Like cunt, the original meaning of that word is like cunning and like all these like really
Predatory words?
nice words.
Oh,
and
nice
like
words.
kind, like cunning,
Ah.
kind, like the etymology of the word.
Oh,
right?
I see where you're
But
going.
then vagina means sheath.
Yeah.
So that's just like something to hold a penis, right?
Yeah.
And yet we're so like averse to saying the word cunt, but not averse to saying the word vagina.
Interesting.
So it's I suppose it's something
Just the
like that.
sound of them,
right?
though.
It's
One
not-
is like a
yeah.
hard kind of like
They-
aggressive.
yeah.
It feels good to say.
But we've just like
Whereas
come
the
to
other one's a bit
yeah.
prissy.
I feel like we could talk about this for hours.
Yeah, so we're going to have to
but-
wrap up. It is true. Because I
We
think
probably
Harry's going to
shouldn't.
break his neck telling us to stop.
this will be a long episode.
Anyway, thanks for joining us for Smut Month. And it's been fun talking to Georgia, soon to be Dr. Georgia Nicholls, about some of her research interests about representations of sex. Join us next week. Our book of the month this month is Christina Lauren's Beautiful Bastard. I keep saying the wrong words, but Beautiful Bastard. And we're very lucky in that next week we are actually going to be talking to Christina and Lauren about the book because it's been re-released lately and we want to talk about the representations of sex. So come back and we'll keep talking sex on Smut Month. But until then, thank you, Payton and Justina, for joining me, and thank you to our extra special guest host, Georgia Nicholls.
Woo. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Amy And is hosted by Amy Matthews, Abby Guy, Payton Hogan, Justina Ashman, Harry Stewart and Millie Heffernan. This podcast is recorded on Gardenland with music by Anthony Wignall and Mass Wisteria. Our logos and branding are designed by Abby Guy. This episode was edited by Abby Guy.